Welcome everyone to another episode of I Was a Teenage Fundamentalist.
In
Troy,
video, on
I was
video,
going to say
in video, yeah.
second video, and I'm just looking. I'm looking behind me and going, I've got to move my printer for next time, or put a background on or something because it's just a little bit messy. And you've got to get rid of that Carlton Football Club jersey in the
It's
background.
my son's room, right? It's my son's room. So what can you do?
That's okay. You been well?
I have been well. Just, another week at work, keep going until I can retire and then die.
It's a happy talk day. That's good. Yes, I'm the same. But I'm always looking for ways to retire early. So that's always on the table every day. But people don't want to hear about our retirement plans. They're probably looking at the screen today and going, "Hey,
Exactly.
there's a
I was
third
thinking
member."
because we've moved over to video, normally we can talk and then bring the person in, but she's just sitting right there, right? So I think
Yes.
we should sort of, I don't want to say the elephant in the room, Kath, because that would be rude, but I'm going to introduce you. This is Cath McKinney. She is the Professional Supervision Program Director at the University of Divinity. That's right. Divinity has its own university. Her background includes extensive experience as a group relations consultant. She holds a PhD from the University of Divinity with a thesis focused on disappointment in Christian theology, stemming from her work as a prison chaplain and inner city minister. There's something we're going to dig into. Kath's teaching specialties are in areas like professional supervision, practical theology, and leadership. She holds appointments within the University of Divinity and Pilgrim Theological College. I'm guessing there's a bit of progress made there. Her recent publications explore topics within feminist theologies and the experience of, again, disappointment. Cath McKinney, welcome to I Was a Teenage Fundamentalist.
Hi, fellas.
Hey, and it's probably worth letting our viewers and listeners in on that. When we started this podcast, it was a bit of a journey. And Kath, you offered us a bit of professional supervision and reflection space, I guess, for unpacking what we were doing and guiding us in that. So we're always forever grateful. COVID got in the way. It does those things. But also I think, that connection that we had with you back then, whenever it was 4 years ago, maybe, I know time goes so fast. I think it's something we've always wanted to tell, well, you to tell your story on the pod. So this is going to be a great opportunity for us to have a bit of a yarn, but also I think dig into some of those things because you're a very wise person. Someone who was able to guide us in what we did.
No pressure there.
There's heaps of pressure. Heaps of
Sorry,
pressure.
I'm going to have to pull something out. Yeah. Okay.
No, we're looking forward to it. But I guess before we do get into that, we want to establish some of your cred. Were you a teenage fundamentalist?
Probably not, but maybe. It's funny, I would have always said, no, not me. But when I first found your pod, I was digging away in my garden. And I think I rethought how I think about myself back then. I was someone who absolutely was a believer, probably still am in some senses of the word, but I guess I felt loyal to the church. I've moved on from there, which I'm sure we'll get to. So in that sense, maybe I was, but I was brought up by someone who was very not fundamentalist. So my dad really came from Northern Ireland and really challenged any fundamentalism as problematic. So that didn't really answer the question. That wasn't very wise. It was kind of answer.
It is what it is. It was what it was. But I hear twangs of an accent when you speak. You don't sound like you're pure Aussie. Tell us a little bit about your background.
I was brought up in the UK. My father was from Northern Ireland and my mum was from Sydney, but they met in Scotland. She got a boat across the water to escape her fundamentalist background, really, and met my dad in Scotland. And then they had me in Oxford, and I came over here with my family when I was 17.
Had you in Oxford? No wonder you went on to be an academic, Kath.
Well, he was an academic, my dad. I mean, there's a certain amount of freedom I've found in academia, but we can go there later.
100%. We've got questions about that. So tell us then about your religious upbringing then. What was the vibe? Did you go to church?
No, not really. I think my dad had a crisis of faith as an academic. He was a theologian and a philosopher, and when we were growing up, no, didn't really. My mum used to drag us off to the local Methodist every now and again, but we didn't really grow up with the church at all until I was about maybe 12, 13, 14. Dad refound his faith in the Anglican system, full on bells, smells and frocks. Loved it. And I found a youth group in this beautiful little, it was like a little suburban church in a little village in Nottingham. And the youth group was beautiful and the people at the church were kind. And I loved it. Had lovely years just going along to the church hall and playing wide games and doing all that stuff that maybe many of your listeners will have done. But I reckon I can spot a youth group a mile off. There's kind of camaraderie and good, clean fun, all that stuff going on. And I loved it. So that was my experience. Maybe when I was, in my very, late, maybe 13, 14, found myself at church.
When you think about those times, though, what were some of those belief systems you held to? Or were you just going along to church, just going, oh, I'm just part of a youth group. This is pretty cool. I'm connected. Or can you pinpoint some of those fundamental beliefs, not necessarily fundamentalist, but fundamental beliefs?
It wasn't really at the church so much because it was a nice Church of England, Anglican, bellsy, smellsy church hall, tombolas and church. All that was a little bit kind of Miss Marple. But I did find a place called the Potter's House in Nottingham, which was a cafe that was run by some folk there that was very capital C Christian. I was their first volunteer. I've always been a bit of a worker. I love a job. So I used to go and volunteer. And I think that's probably where I was exposed to more fundamentalist Christian thinking, like probably the stuff that my dad would roll his eyes at. But that's probably where I heard more of that kind of Christian-y language, more of that defined way of being in the world. The local Anglican was more about just kind of being part of the community.
And I would imagine it also there would have been sort of a giving kindness, that kind of thing. Was it that, or was it just more
belonging? No, it was. I remember the tombolas and the jumble sales and Christmas and being part of a community. And I remember feeling safe and belonging, and I was allowed to be just a little bit who I was. Probably an awkward kid. And I remember the kindness. I remember the old ladies and the young folk. I look back, it was wholesome. It was kind. It actually reminded me it kind of welcomed me in as a person into the world. That would be my experience of that youth group. And then volunteering and being a little bit more sort of fervent with the Potter's House, that would have been kind of where I was exposed to that. The people that ran it were people that had been addicted to heroin and had been saved through the church. So they had that really clear conviction that they were saved by Jesus. So they had that, I guess they had that certainty. They had more at stake for them. Whereas the local church, it didn't feel urgent. It didn't feel dangerous. So I look back now and I probably had both. So by the time I came to Australia, I found a more evangelical church when I arrived in Australia and just went straight into the youth group and the getting involved. And probably I never thought about this before, probably coming to Australia merged both those things. So I ended up in a really big church environment where it was probably a combination.
Sure. So being 17 and moving countries.
Yep.
Do you think that the church sort of gave you an instant community, having sort of left everything behind?
Instant. My first friend at the church there is still a dear friend now. Instant. I remember just going in, being welcomed, and straight away finding a place and feeling like I had somewhere to put my body. Like I had to go back to school. I came to Australia, had to put a school uniform on. I remember sitting outside the school crying, pathetic, thinking, oh, what the hell am I going to do now? The school was a bit awkward, although I threw myself into it, but church felt a bit familiar. And I felt really welcomed. It got a bit tricky later on when, I had a baby, but we can get to that. But at that time, I did. I felt really welcomed. And there was a lot of kindness again.
So do you think...
I was going to say, you gave people a sneak peek then, Kath, into what's coming. You had a
Oh,
baby. It was
okay.
just one of those teasers, and then it's like we went to a commercial, but we didn't. Troy, I jumped in, and this is, it's difficult on video too because people can see it, but they can see we're real.
Yeah,
That's right. That's true. That's
we're
true.
having a crack.
So I'm trying to sort of understand how fundamentalist your faith was or wasn't. So were there any beliefs that were presented to you as unquestionable truths? And if so, at what stage did you buy into those, or did that never happen?
I think now, hindsight's kind of fickle, isn't it? But I think I was probably always argumentative and contrary. I was brought up by a man that said, you can think what you want, but you've got to be able to defend it. So, I would ask questions and I did poke, I did object. I can always remember objecting to the thought that someone else wasn't invited because of who they were. I remember having the disagreements and the arguments way back in the 80s about diverse sexualities and genders, although back then we didn't say that. We had another language that now, of course, would be probably inappropriate. But I remember thinking it just doesn't seem right. Like, why can't they come? Why can't they? I was probably naive to think that I could sort of just drag someone in sideways. I never, to this day, I still don't get it. How you can read the Gospels and then tell someone they're not invited. I still don't get it. And so I think when I was kind of younger and then took up leadership positions in the church, we ran something on a Sunday night that was very, we used to work at the local drop-in centre. So we ran something that was for young people that were not church. So I just said, well, why are we praying or singing anything when they don't believe it? It's ridiculous. Let's talk about issues and use different music and, do different stuff. And there was a whole team of us. We had a whole lot of fun. And the person running the church at the time gave us a really free rein. To be fair, they were like, fair enough. You can't invite people to come to church and explore stuff and expect them to pray and sing songs about stuff they don't believe in. So I think even back then I was probably poking around a bit.
So it sounds like there's a heavy influence of social justice, I think, in some of the stuff that you were doing, and even back in England when you're talking about working as a volunteer at the Potter's House, and then you've come. Was there a drive to these young people? Were you trying to get them into church? Were you trying to get them to believe in God? What was the driver for these unchurched kids coming along?
Look, it was probably a bit of both. My mum, very influenced by both my mum and my dad. So my dad was a really interesting creative theologian who believed in a united Ireland in the 60s. So, I couldn't stress how dangerous that was back then. It's still a bit dangerous now. So he was a man that would think and argue about politics. And my mum, she just used to say, never cook a meal that can't be divided. Like, you always make a meal that can go further. We were brought up with people in our home all the time. And so there wasn't a sense of needing to qualify to be present, and hopefully my kids had a similar upbringing. They used to say, is anyone here, when they woke up? That idea that, people come in and out of your home. And I think that was my strong theological framework. There was not a question of who's invited. There's a question of how we welcome each other. And so I probably back then thought, yes, it was framed in a Christian understanding of God in the world and the presence of Jesus. I was a young Christian woman. But there's an and in that, not a but. I think I was always interested in how other faiths could be understood. And those big questions that you have when you're young, the absolute truth questions and the what if I was always really interested in that.
Where'd you sit on those fundamentals, though, of Christianity, like virgin birth, Jesus' resurrection,
I was always
having
looking for a
to...
loophole. Always looking for a loophole. Always thinking, yeah, but if you hadn't heard about Jesus, but you responded to God in your heart, surely that's enough. That old chestnut? I think I was always looking for a loophole. Always thinking, yeah, but, how can we possibly know everything? Therefore, nothing's certain, is it? But I think I was probably always looking for that angle.
Cath, lukewarm. That's
Yeah,
the word
spew
that
out of the
comes to
mouth.
mind.
Warm. Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
Just, yeah, maybe. Probably Troy and I would have had a few disagreements back in the day, Troy.
Yeah, and maybe, and look, we'll get to the point where our paths crossed, because we probably would have back then as well.
Yeah,
But Kath, you mentioned a moment ago, then I had a baby, and also I know that you eventually ended up in Christian leadership,
I
right,
do.
within
Yeah.
churches and stuff. So which came first, the chicken or the egg?
Well, lots of chickens and lots of eggs everywhere, really. Um, I probably always was in that kind of leadership pool. Ended up in the youth group doing something, or I probably always was on that trajectory. I was in leadership. I was, singing, worship, leadership when I got pregnant with my son. Um, and once again, looking for a loophole. You see, I remember saying to my boyfriend at the time, who I thought I was going to be with forever. Well, we're together, aren't we? Use that language about pledging my troth. Or I remember thinking there's got to be a loophole here. So if we love each other when we're committed, then that's all right, isn't it? So I remember
You're not alone in that, though, Kath. I think so many Christian kids are like, well, we're married in the eyes of God anyway,
yeah,
for sure. Yeah.
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 And I felt deeply, deeply committed to this person. And yeah, anyway, I ended up preggers, and yeah, I think it's funny. I don't really. I know we're on video. People are going to see how awkward I am. I'm 60 next year, and I'm still like clutching my pearls a bit, except they broke. Um, I I remember my family were lovely. My dad and mum were kind of a bit critical for about a minute, but they couldn't have been more critical than I was. And they just ended up just getting really enthusiastic, and my dad got beside himself about having a grandchild coming in. And the folk at the church were kind of good, but kind of. I remember someone, praying for me and praying for my sin. And even then I thought, no one said congratulations. No one said, welcome, little one. I remember feeling like somehow it was all wrong. And I do think I've taken that with me through my adult life. There was a deep sense of shame. I don't remember being congratulated when I had a child. I look back now and I think that's not right. This child came into the world, and he's a thoroughly marvelous human in so many ways, and was so loved by so many people, and so loved, actually. I used to, because we were up there. I was up there talking doing the talks on Sunday evening or preaching, and I would bring my son in. It was always talked about because, of course, he taught me so much about what it means to love and be loved in the world. Isn't that the whole point? I would say he taught me so much about God's presence in the world.
It sounds like it surprised you, Kath, that people responded that way. The church that I was certainly came into, when I was a teenager, that wouldn't surprise me. I mean, I would have seen people judged absolutely for that. I would have seen people even, to be honest, kicked out of
Yeah.
churches for that. So it sounds like the church you were in was relatively moderate. Or was it that you were just unaware of what people maybe thought in their judgment?
Maybe. I mean, I look back now. I mean, I ended up taking up a staff position afterwards. And whenever they had to talk about sex, they'd get me to do it, until one day I said, I'm not talking about sex anymore. I'm not the only one that's had sex. Someone else can do it. I remember the staff meeting thinking, Kath's not doing that anymore. Can someone else do it? So maybe I was kind of the token single mum for a long while, probably. But I look back now and I'm disappointed that I didn't have more fire in my belly. Literally. Like, I think I remember. I think maybe maybe I used to think, well, I just have to take what's on offer. Like, I did have a sense of shame about it, and I don't know. I would really hope that'd be different now. I I find it hard to talk about this. I find that my words get a bit stuck, and it's probably because I haven't really talked about it much. Rory's now 35, but I do look back now, and I think it was very formative. And I tried for most of my 20s to be such a good girl, because in a really public way, I was a bad girl. I got pregnant. In fact, most of the church didn't know. They gradually worked out because I was leading worship and my belly just got bigger. It's like, how do I tell them? Well, eventually they're going to find out.
I can remember, Brian. Do you remember when we were at church and there was one of the young women? She was actually a pastor's daughter, and she had this little boy, and she was definitely welcome. She would come along to church and everything, but there's no way she would have ever been in leadership, or she was just basically, it was as if she was, and I'm not saying this is where she was at, but from our perspective, it was as if she was just waiting around for somebody to pick her up with him, get married, and make an honest woman out of her. And so that was where we came from. And I don't mean to make light of what you went through, Kath. I'm just saying that's really the mentality. But it sounds to me like at least this church, to some degree, was they were allowing you to continue on in ministry. So there was a forgiveness, even if you were pregnant.
Yes, the fallen woman. I maybe it's just because of the trajectory of where I've ended up. I look back now and I long for the younger me to be celebrated. I think, where was the woman that came along and said, well done, or how does it feel? Or, where was that sense of camaraderie or sisterhood? And I think, to be fair, people were kind, but they didn't quite know what to do with me, because I stuck around, then I got put on staff. So I was obviously a little bit kind of shirty and present. So there must have been something about my presence there that maybe betrayed some of the insecurities I was feeling, maybe some of that apology. I do remember feeling less than, feeling like I wasn't a real family. So I remember that quite clearly.
Do you think that drove you in any way into leadership, or, into belonging, like sort of deeper into the heart of the beast, because you didn't feel you belonged?
Yeah, probably, because I ended up leaving that particular leafy green church and going to work with God Squad crew, who really became my people. And I think it's very different there. I didn't feel like I was sticking out like a sore thumb. I moved into a different context where I felt a lot more normal, or I didn't feel as awkward.
For the sake of viewers and listeners, tell us about the God Squad. Who was the God Squad?
God Squad, but they still exist. They're an organisation of people, men and women, that would say that they minister to the outlaw bike scene. So they're still around the world. I was at St. Martin's for a long time, which is sort of like their mother church. I ended up being a minister there for many years. My husband and I were members there for 22 years. And so I used to work on the schools team, used to go into schools, used to go to prisons, used to work with kids. The guys would come with their bikes, and there's a whole lot of really interesting, lovely engagement that went on. At its very best, Squad was just this rabble of kind of wildness and just, different sort of belonging. We used to call St. Martin's the community of the medicated and brokenhearted. It was self-named from within the community. Deep. I loved my years at St. Martin's. There was a deep sense of kind of the wild presence of community, the opposite of a sanitized church environment. But I look back now, and that was also deeply conservative.
How so?
One of the big issues was, once again, diverse sexualities and genders, welcoming. There's always a barrier. There's always a boundary, isn't there? We can be as wild or as inclusive or as engaging as we possibly can as a group of people, and then there's always someone that gets a no. It's always, something or somebody that is the bridge too far. And I think, I went to the Mardi Gras years and years ago, and I marched with a group of people. We marched an apology for the church.
This is the gay Mardi Gras in Australia.
Yeah. I remember going up with some friends, and we were in the actual Mardi Gras marching. We were behind. There was a whole group of faith groups. There was this fantastic group in front of us who were representing a Muslim community, and I called them the Muzzies with Buzzies because I had the tits out. Oh, gee, we laughed. I hope that's not going to offend anybody. Please no, because it was this beautiful, joyful celebration of bodies and presence. But I remember marching, and we went down one of the big streets in Sydney, and there was this old guy in a wedding dress, and he was dancing down the streets, and his veil was flipped around him. And I just thought, that's God amongst us. That I was moved to weeping, this presence of this old body in this wedding dress, kind of the madness of it. But that, for me, felt like the presence of the divine amongst us. Maybe that makes me just a nutter. And, well, that's just, I still remember it. I remember feeling, maybe that's the fundamentalist in me. I felt so convicted that we were accompanied by this divine presence, embodied by this old man in a wedding dress with a veil flipping around.
To say, Kath, that it doesn't sound like the fundamentalist in you at all, because no fundamentalist is going to be in that moment and see God, right? They're just going to see, the hounds of hell. I mean, wow.
On my dying day, if I closed my eyes and thought about the presence of God, that'd be one of the images. That and a heavily breasted Peruvian woman that I once met. Anyway, that's another story. Actually, I'll tell you, I was at a conference. It was a group relations conference. It's a fantastic event where you go and do here and now work. It's completely annihilatingly magnificent. And there was this woman there. She was like an oracle. She had massive boobs, and she had a bun with little round glasses on her nose, and she was one of the consultants. And I didn't get to speak to her for the whole week. And all I wanted to do was speak to this woman. Anyway, at the end of the week, all the staff came in and all the participants, we mingled and chatted. And I went up to her and I said, all week, I've wanted to lay my head on your breast. And she just looked at me and she just went, take it. And I lay my head and bounced on her massive bosoms for about 30 seconds, and then I walked away. So that's my other image of the divine amongst us. So there you go. That's where I am.
That's where the fundamentalist in me would feel the presence of God, Kath. So it's
voluminous breasts bouncing underneath my cheek. Yeah, there you go. So that might be
I just want to point out that you've told us 2 boob stories already, but there's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. So, Kath, you have spent a significant amount of time in ministry and theological study. How did you find the tension between what you were experiencing in the church, with, not even necessarily just the churches that you were attending, but just the church, and this need that you had to welcome everyone, to bring everybody in? There's so much there. Let's unpack some of that.
Well, I think for many years, the little inner city community in Collingwood was a good fit. I used to talk about the role of the minister being the door wedge. It's just our job to keep the door open. And it felt like a really good fit. And when I started wanting to work academically, it was because I was really interested in what I could see was being made small, but was experienced as big. This idea of experiencing disappointment in the world, and that being made small. And it seemed to me it was a very big experience for people. And we had a member of our community, a young man who lived with us for a while, took his own life. He died one Good Friday. He was not that young, youngish gay man, took his own life. And the Easter Sunday that we all gathered after this guy had died, his name was Damien. I think some of your listeners may remember him. The Easter Sunday after he died, for me, was just a game changer, because his absence was more present than any experience of the divine. We all just gathered and wept. It was Easter Sunday. We were meant to be eating chocolate and running around and doing the celebratory thing, and we just wept. And I remember thinking, it's just bigger than anything, bigger than that deep sadness in the world where someone can take their own life because they don't feel like they're worth enough. That is bigger than anything anyone's got to offer, any liturgy, any belief system, any creed. It still makes me want to weep that people live convinced that they're not worth life. And that for me was a game changer. It's where I started to think seriously about how we could engage. For me, there was a freedom about thinking academically, but it was because of what I was living and what I was experiencing and how I could see people within the community that I loved could see the reality of life actually being grim a lot of the time. And then I went to work in the prisons, and the women there they taught me so much. They were like, yeah, Friday, everyone gets killed, and Sunday, yeah, there's all sorts of stuff that can be celebrated. But, oh, yeah, this deep grief where nothing now can come to any good, where life and hope is ripped out of you, that, I think for a lot of people, that's a big chunk of life. They wanted to take that seriously and honor it, I think. So I wrote 100,000 words about it, which is what you do in your spare time.
I was going to say, let talk to us a bit about that, because obviously that was a big driver for you to do your PhD in
Yeah,
Christian disappointment. And I know that for myself, when I remember being in this crisis time of what does this whole faith mean, and what is it? Do I even believe it? Which I think was most of my Christian journey. But there was definitely pivotal points, and one of them, somebody gave me that Philip Yancey book. Is it Philip Yancey, Disappointment with God? And I remember reading that and being so freeing in some way that I saw that someone else was asking hard questions. What was it for you about that journey of writing your PhD, which is not a short journey? It's a long time, couple of years. Talk us through that a bit, and talk us through some of your findings.
I never talked about Christian disappointment. I talked about disappointment. I called it Leading Saturday Lives, disappointment as authentic, relating in the world. And I remember really early on having a chat with somebody about, disappointed, I think, about something or other. It might have been at a house auction or something, and someone made light of it like, oh, it was meant to be, everything happens for a reason. I was like, that's just bullshit, that is. Like, God never gives you anything you can't cope with. Well, tell that to Damien. Like, it's just bullshit. I just objected to it. So it was meant to be. What will be, will be. It is what it is. These attempts at trying to contain something that is utterly uncontainable, that is, that can render someone abandoned in life. I was beginning to suspect that there was more to think about. And I think that's what really kind of gave me the energy and the focus to do something big like a PhD. And the other thing that I will just say between the three of us is that I was getting really sick of people just going, oh, you're just a bloody hippie who wants to be nice to everybody. I wanted to say, well, that's Dr. McKinney, actually. You can disagree with me, but I've thought about this theologically, and I've thought about it enough to write this great big degree, so you can shove your patronizing bullshit where the sun doesn't shine. That's probably really inappropriate on this podcast. But that's actually, I was beginning to feel irritated about how my theological opinions were being treated by some people that I knew. So
Let's talk about being a woman then, because being a woman is, and especially, you had been a single mum, you wore a scarlet letter, and probably not at St. Martin's, right? They probably didn't care, but maybe you can correct me. But what was your experience of being a woman in leadership? In what you've already said, there was undercurrents of conservatism in that community anyway.
yeah, and strong patriarchal frameworks as well. And it's my experience of being a woman now as well. I enjoy feminist theology, part of a feminist theological network at the university. And I think there's something even more urgent about attempting to think critical about systemic and contextual realities. So it's not just about me, even though I experience it as myself, in a body, but there's always more going on. And so thinking about the pushes and pulls with the gender dynamics, and now, of course, it's gender and diverse sexuality dynamics, there's always something going on. There's a push and a pull for power and authority. I mean, my work at the university now is predominantly about power and authority. The question of what gets in the way of us being good to one another, what gets in the way of good work. We can think about that philosophically, and we can think about it in its simplest terms about, doing work well alongside one another. Systemic and contextual diversions are swirling around us all the time. And, patriarchal scaffolds are everywhere. The assumptions that we take into our bodies, the way we treat one another, the way we allow ourselves to be to be engaged with. I'm a product of my time. I'm 60 next year. How the hell did that happen? And I still feel it. I feel it very strongly in my body, the gender dynamics. And so I'm more interested in having a conversation about it than defending it. So when someone says to me, oh, I'm not a feminist, I'm like, okay, tell me why not? I'm interested in conversations, not in doing battle. Because I think a patriarchal response pulls us into battle zones. There's a little bit of evidence in the world to support that working hypothesis. So I'm interested in critical engagement and thinking. And I guess that's my response to that question.
So what did you rub up against, though, as a woman in leadership roles within what I would probably call in Melbourne, where we were, the evangelical left, which would have given lip service to this, but what was the reality of it?
Well, this is where it gets tricky, isn't it? Because I've got my own experience of feeling thoroughly welcome. I worked in a church environment with my darling colleague. The two women led the church up to a point, and then we did hit a ceiling. There was a strong feel with some members of the community about women in leadership and the presence of a senior male leader having more authority and more power. And I think I did. Maybe I was naive and thought that I could dodge it and weave it and find a loophole, but I think it's present. I mean, could I say more about that? Maybe. I think we deny it at our peril. I think it's more interesting to talk about the realities of gender dynamics as they are re-emerging. I mean, I don't know. I think it's getting more conservative, not less. And I hear with some of the students at college some, assumptions about who should be in leadership and what the right way and wrong way is. And that takes me by surprise because I think, wow, that's still being thought about. I thought that was old news. But there's something interesting about how it keeps coming up, keeps coming in.
What do you think, because things are cyclic quite often in society, what do you think has brought it back into a current cycle? Because I completely agree that this is very present at the moment, and it's particularly the last few years. What do you think has driven it in Australia, but also globally?
When the first thing that comes to mind is fear. So my father taught me that the opposite of faith is certainty. So if we can sit in an uncertain place where we can get used to not knowing and therefore having to engage critically, having to think seriously about what it means for me not to be you and for you to never understand what it means to be me. The true empathetic position is never knowing what it means to be someone else. It means that we have to sit in a place of deep, humble, critical engagement. That's exhausting and it's scary for people. And I'm not sure we're training people to expect that or training our children to know what to do. So we can really easily engage with this kind of assumption that if we know stuff, we'll be in a safer position, that life will be more contained, that we will feel protected and safer. But I'd argue it's the exact opposite of that. But that demands something of us as a community.
Yeah, I agree. A lot of that simplification of life. So I think that's what people are searching for, because life, I think all around us is getting more and more complex and difficult to navigate, and we have so much choice as well. So I think as a response, people do try and simplify life to a certain degree, and then it becomes very binary: good, bad. You're on this side, I'm on that side. And I'm certainly sensing a lot of that happening, and certainly an increase happening. And I'm just wondering, is that the same thing that you were reflecting that is happening, you're saying, in your teaching environment as well at the university?
Yeah. Do you know Kierkegaard's parable about the geese?
No, do tell.
I normally have a necklace with a goose on it because I find this so helpful. But it broke yesterday. Ooh, a bit of a ominous experience for me. But I normally have this lovely goose on our necklace. And he's got this parable about the wild geese provoking the tame geese. And the wild goose goes down and tries to encourage the tame geese to fly. And eventually the tame geese turn against the wild geese and say, basically, bugger off, you're too wild. But by then, the wild geese has become tamed and can't fly. And he's got this idea that a tame goose never becomes a wild goose. But on the other hand, a wild goose can certainly become a tame goose. So actually urges, says that the wild goose must never be commanded by the tame goose. That surely it might be commendable to try and encourage the tame goose to fly, but you have to be able to still migrate. You have to be able to still take flight. And it's that still taking flight that, is it a freedom or is it a danger? I think it's a really helpful parable, that it feels comforting maybe to be a tame goose. But then when you're a wild goose, you get to fly, you get to be part of a community. You haven't got to lead for long. Your brothers and sisters take over and you get to be part of something. But for where the tame goose is sitting, it's too unboundaried, it's too unsafe. That feels a bit esoteric, but that helps me to think about that.
I have heard that parable before now that you tell it. So what this makes me think or want to ask you is, you have pushed up against the, contradictions, the injustices, the even the disappointments within the church for a really long time. And you hinted in the intro that you've even moved away. Did you just get tired? Did you just come to a point where you just said, I can't do this anymore? Or was it more just not your role anymore?
No, I got kicked out. I got called a witch. I got kicked out. We would never have left our church, I don't think, my husband and I. We felt really committed to it and committed to the area. But I got called a witch and kind of got unceremoniously removed. And we left town and came to Dalesford. So I didn't even realise how traumatised I was till I got here, and then realised that we kind of ran.
Tell me to bugger off, Kath, if you don't want to go there. But what was it? Like, what was it that led to you being called a witch? Was there a series of events, or was there what?
Yeah, I think it was a cumulative. I think it was it's entirely possible that I'm a pain in the ass. And as I said to my daughter, well, if a witch is a clever woman who's misunderstood by a whole pack of fellas, then maybe I am a witch. But it was the violence about that I objected to. Call me a witch, but it's the violence about being expelled. I got very, very insistent about queer presence in our community. Like I started to fight with members of the leadership team about what it meant to, moving well past welcome and this is about celebration. We don't welcome people. We don't say we're affirming. We celebrate one another, all of us. And I really started pushing back when there was sort of a growing homophobia and misogyny that started to emerge. And I think I just really, really pushed back against it. And it became unbearable. It became unbearable for a number of people. And the sad thing was that, for a moment there, that was a little community church that was kind of bursting at the seams. And I don't want to be too utopian about it. It had all sorts of issues, but it was messy and a little bit wild. And there was a place for a huge diversity of people. And I just thought, well, that's the church that I can be part of. And when I was expelled and a whole lot of people left at the same time, because it was no longer a place that was bearable, I just suddenly realized that I couldn't collude anymore. Then we had the non-binding plebiscite atrocity, where the church had a chance to lead, then it had a chance to participate, then it had a chance to follow. And I think I just thought, I can't collude anymore. So working at the University of Divinity as an institution that I invest my time and energy in, I rate it. I really, if you can love a system, I rate it, I respect it. It's a way for me to be in service to and with the churches. I have colleagues and people that I really enjoy and respect there. I haven't found a church since.
The way you've told the story of this church is that it was very welcoming, that it was very open. What changed? Was it, you say you're a pain in the ass, you're being self-deprecating, I hear that, but was it a shift in them? Was it a shift in you? What happened?
What changed was that there was a senior leader who came back into the church community who really, really disagreed with me on issues about female leadership and issues about same-sex celebration. Just disagreed with me. And he was a very, very big presence in that community, a very big presence in Squad. And when push came to shove, he pushed harder. And I think there was a moment there where I thought, I actually can't fight this. So, I mean, that's really what it was. Homophobia and misogyny just exploded. Excuse the pun, but that's kind of what it was. It kind of erupted in the community. And I look now at the result of that, and it was not life-giving. People did not flourish. The community is not going on to greater, better things. It is greatly diminished. And it's a source of deep sadness, really.
And Kath, you're saying that caused you to flee, I guess, to where you're living now, but also to retreat more within the walls of academia. They've felt a safer place. But how do you feel about, like, you're feeding into the system, I guess, through an academic standpoint? How do you feel about what you're contributing there? Do you feel that you're able to make change and potentially challenge what's happening there? And I'm keen to hear your observations of what you're seeing happen in both the academic setting, but also when that then translates and goes back into the church.
Sure. In between leaving Melbourne and getting a job at the university, I worked in the prison system for a few years. I worked in a maximum security prison with women. And I think that for me was key. Because the women challenged a whole lot of assumptions I had about what it meant to be faithful, what it meant to wrestle with the idea of God in the world, what it meant to be loyal. And one thing, I mean, it was actually an Easter engagement. It's interesting, isn't it? It was Damien dying at Easter that really set me off on a trajectory of wanting to think critically about being disappointed in the bigness of it all. And I remember one Easter I sat with these women and we talked about the Easter narrative together. And once again, the most shocking thing for them wasn't actually Friday, crucifixion, because they were like, oh, well, violence happens. It wasn't even Saturday. Like, yeah, that was big disappointment. We discussed that in the past, but Sunday was like, yeah, things come and go and whatever. It was breakfast on the beach with the fish and Jesus saying, do you love me? To Peter 3 times. It was that relational engagement where they could not for the life of them work out why this character of Jesus would want to be in relationship with people who'd abandoned him. And that actually gave me great pause to really think about what it means to be committed to relational encounter and relational engagement. And so when I ended up being offered a role at the university, it's a deeply relational role. I work as a practical theologian. My key question is, as I said before, what gets in the way of people being good to one another in the world, of a response to the other than human world, to how we deal with plants and animals and earth as body. And for me, it's a place where I can settle, I can think critically, I get to work with mature practitioners in the world that come in and want to think and learn. And if I didn't think that it didn't make a difference, I wouldn't do it. I think I'd just grow flowers in my garden and bake. But I do get a sense that it's that contribution to the resistance, hey? How do we contribute to resisting the world just being a nightmare? Sometimes they're little micro contributions, a conversation, a question, a pause where someone might be allowed to continue their thought without being cut off.
Kath, when I hear you talking, and I'm going to put on my Christian hat, which I don't wear very often, but when you look at what happened to yourself, I mean, here you are sitting with the modern version of the sinners and the tax collectors, and the church is rejecting you, calling you names, and I use this as a metaphor, but basically crucifying you, running you out of town. Did you look at that and go, oh, I'm living the gospel now? Or did you look at that and go, well, this is shit? Or was it both?
I never thought I'm living the gospel now. That's always seemed to be a tad narcissistic to me. I know that was language that was kind of used, especially back in the day. I think I felt it took me a long time to kind of catch up with what was going on. But I think I felt that same shame again. It takes me back to being pregnant. I think it was shame. I've had to manage. I constantly have to think about why would I feel shame about something that I also feel so convicted about? And I think that's where some of the patriarchal dynamics come in. That, the things that we do to women, the things that are done to bodies in particular, but I would like to talk about the things that are done to women's bodies systemically, so that we take stuff in. And I think I almost believed for a while that I kind of deserved it, but I didn't for a minute feel an apology for it either. I felt that maybe that's where I am a bit fundamentally. If I felt certain about anything, I was certain about my objection.
You are another story of religious trauma, except you were in leadership, and you were by many people esteemed, and yet even you haven't escaped that. Is that a term that you've seen or heard and thought, religious trauma? Is that what I've gone through? Have you questioned that for yourself?
I have a really good friend who's a narrative therapist who is an expert in religious trauma. She's been on this pod. She's a very dear friend. And I think in conversation with her, I've realized that is the case. But I guess I felt like I didn't qualify for it. I felt like, oh, it wasn't that traumatic. I wasn't as bad as that crew over there. I think it's that self-deprecating a tendency. And as you say that now, I think I'm ready to own that now. Maybe that's why I'm here talking to you guys. I'm ready to own that. And I see it in the work I do. Sometimes people come and they want to train to be supervisors, and supervision is a modality that the Royal Commission into institutional response to child abuse has recommended, gets taken up in the world of work. And some people arrive on their knees, so broken by the reality of what's gone on in institutions. And some people come defensive and fighting in defense of their own place in the institutions. Both of those postures don't allow us to work, don't allow us to even begin to think about how to be good to each other. And if there's any way that those postures can be respected and nurtured so that we might be able to stand and engage together, then I think what I'm saying is that my experience of religious trauma enables me to have deep compassion for that. I feel deeply moved by people that are traumatized by anything to do with faith and religion.
What's it done, speaking of faith and religion, what's it done to your belief or concept of God and faith, having been through what you've been through?
I never ever doubted the presence of God in the world. And I think for a lot of my life, that's why I was loyal to the institution of the churches. And now it's just moved into land and relationships. Dogs. I mean, when I would come back from the prison, someone asked me, how do you enter into home life after being in the prison? And I'd said, I kneel on the ground and put my fingers in the earth. And they thought I was being metaphorical. And I said, no, I actually do that. I kneel in the ground. I've got great big Danes come around me and I would dig in the earth. And I feel like I've learned to grow things. I've learned to have conversations with the other than human world. That Wendell Berry talks about going to the peace of wild things. when I awake in the night fearful of what will become of my children, I go into the peace of wild things. And that for me is now a communion of faith. And thinking, engaging, thoughts waiting. There's this fantastic idea of thoughts waiting to be found, thoughts waiting for a thinker, working with a group of people in a classroom environment and thinking together and saying what thoughts are waiting for us. That's like a quest. I find that deeply theologically relevant.
And what about your relationship to, air quotes, the church, however you define that? How are you feeling about the church now?
My relationship to individuals in the churches is I have a deep commitment to many different people that serve in the churches. My relationship to the institution, I don't know. We need to go out and have a coffee. Like I just don't know. There you go. I don't know. I'll work in service to and with, but for me, it's relational. It's all about the people that I'm meeting, that I'm working with. I can be in service to a person. I cannot be in service to an institution.
And that's a fair call. I guess we've got a bucket load of listeners who would definitely mirror your story in many different ways, in the way that they've been hurt by that institution, by people in the church. Troy and I have our own stories. Everyone's got their own story of it, I guess, but it's something that I think as you journey along in life, you learn a lot of things, and you learn a lot of, upon reflection, I guess, ways of dealing with that. For you, what have been some of those key things, some of those key takeaways for you as you reflect back on those times? And we'll continue to do so, but what are those things so far that you've learned that you could share those pearls of wisdom with our viewers and listeners who are maybe struggling with some of the very similar things that you have?
Yeah. Now, the work we do in the department that I work in, it's really role focused. I find that really freeing. And so we work personally, systemically, and contextually, and spiritually, thinking about what it means to find and make and take up our role in the world. And if I think about the role of being me, the role of being a wife and a mother and a colleague and a friend as a continuum, I continue to find and make and take it up, then there's a freedom in that I can be an authorized soul. I can decide to be present in the world. I can decide to do what I can to resist aggression, to resist fascism, to resist certainty. And even if it means that it's a small gesture in my world, that there's a freedom in recognizing that we are never completely at the mercy of anything. And there's something about, for me, it's sinking into the earth with my dogs and the animals and whatever, but noticing that the seasons bring changes, that there is a moving world around us that invites us in. I feel like there's a constant invite to participate. And the invite to participate is all around us. And it's all, who are you today? What is it to be you in the world today? And if I could have any influence on anybody, I would just ask people to respond daily to that question. This is what I think today. This is what I can contribute today. How can I manage that space between me and you? What does it mean for me to take a breath and plant my feet on the earth and have a thought about being present? And that has changed the way I've lived. I'm not waiting for an invite so much anymore.
It's interesting because I think you said to me, maybe it was at the wake we were at, or the other week, or maybe it was another time on the phone, but you said to me something about wanting to help, and maybe it was yourself, but help others. How do we be present in the world? How do we turn up? How do we, be agents of good? And you didn't use that word, but that really struck me, even as someone post-Christian, it really struck me because I thought I can relate to that. And I can strive to ask that myself, because, even myself having moved away from the church a long time ago, I still wrestle with authorities. I still wrestle with injustices. I still wrestle with so much. And whether it's the left or whether it's the right, what the right calls a boycott, the left calls cancel culture. There's just so much of everything around us, and this sort of polarized existence, and turning up to be somewhere that is, you know, Switzerland in the midst of this is not an easy place to be. But to be good in the midst of this is not an easy place to be.
It's this, what does it mean to be authentic in the world? I keep going back to this idea of thinking, waiting, engaging. We talk a lot about pausing in the work that I do. What does it mean to pause and consider, to wait for what someone has to say, to put ourselves in an environment where we have conversations, bring back the salon, bring back the art of conversation, engagement. This idea that we have to agree to get on is a sort of a madness. Even though they agree to disagree, that's bullshit. Why don't we just disagree rather than reach a place where no one's that content about anything? It seems to me that we have the capacity to be creative and to be good to one another. I keep going back to that same thing. For me, that's it. How can we be good to one another?
It's funny, isn't it? Like I when I reflect upon my broader friendship groups, there are so many people who I am the complete opposite of in my views and everything, and I can get along with anyone as long as they're not an arsehole.
Yeah.
So if they're an arsehole for me, that's the key, where I'm just like, yeah, no, you're not for me. But in many ways, it brings a richness to your relationship when you don't agree, and where you can actually, because you can learn from each other. And I really enjoy those relationships in a sick sort of way.
Can
So
I throw
Roy,
something
Roy
in
said to
before you
me,
respond, Kath?
yep.
And I just want to say that my father, for example, he's like a lot of people's fathers, right? He watches Sky News. He thinks that there's nothing wrong with Donald Trump, all this kind of stuff. And yet I love my dad. And, I could lay charges, I don't mean criminal charges. I mean, I could lay charges at his feet and say, look what you did at this times in my life, all this kind of stuff, right? We put that down a long time ago. And one of the things that I think, the universe has brought my way is someone like that in my life, who is basically the epitome of people I don't know that I think I never want anything to do with. And yet this is my father. And I love my dad. And yet he's not easy to love. And to be honest, Brian, I don't want to say this about my dad, but sometimes he's an asshole. And yet I got to stay in relationship with him. And so for me, hearing the way that you're talking about and talking about, being present in the world, it's being tolerant. And I know this is politically loaded when I say being tolerant of the intolerant, because they talk about that being a trick by intolerance to woo us in. I've heard it all said, but still there is a relational, there's a loving of these people is what I'm trying to say.
But as soon as we decide that it's not just personal, we say, what's going on for that person? What is being put on them that they have to have that opinion that is so big? What is it about them? I mean, you look at Trump. We're all responsible for Trump. Like there's something deeply systemic going on a world level. It'd be great to just blame it on the Americans, but it's not about that. This is where I think this whole idea of critical thinking, being able to actually think other than just personally, and at the same time acknowledge that everything's experienced by bodies. So being careful with one another is important. But the freedom, I remember one of our students saying just last year at the end of a big teaching session, she looked at me and she said, I guess it means it's not all my fault. It was like the relief that nothing is ever all someone's fault. There's a kind of there can be a freedom in relating well together. I've got this Mary Oliver poem that's up here. I'm wondering whether or not I should just offer it as part of our conversation. I don't know how you feel about poetry on the pod, but I think she says it really richly. It's interesting. It's another one about geese. Geese must be on my mind. But can I read it out at this point?
Of course you can. We've actually had poetry on the pod before. So,
So it's called Wild Geese by Mary Oliver. It seems very relevant to where we're going. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over, announcing your place in the family of things. I reckon she's got it. She's nailed it.
What is it for that poem that really brings it home for you?
It's the starting and the ending. You do not have to be good. I just think, oh, golly, it's such a relief. Because, that you do not have to work on your knees, that kind of self-effacing. Well, I've experienced that, being on my knees a bit. And then the world calling itself to our imagination, and that beckoning in, announcing your place in the family of things. It's that the reminder that we are home. It moves me. And I think that's, what she says. That's what I think.
Kath, I'm going to get you to turn your light on because it's
Okay,
getting
got the
darker.
door. Okay, hang
And
on.
yeah, you're turning into the Matrix a bit there.
I can twist it so that the light's not there. Is that right?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, good.
Great.
Okay. I've got another question for you. You have told us a lot about the meaning of your work that you do. You've also told us a lot about, being with your dogs, putting your fingers in the ground. I'm saying all this because I want you to know I'm paying attention, even though I'm about to ask you this.
Okay.
What are you currently, besides those things, what are you currently passionate about? And how does your understanding of the world and human connection that you've spoken about inform these passions now? So I'm not asking you for theology and philosophy. I'm asking your experience of the world.
I think what's really got me at the moment is this question: what is my contribution to the resistance? How am I resisting a wave of fascism in the world? And I'm thinking about micro resistances, right down to how I drive, how I let someone in, do I do the wave, what I do with my body when I'm in public, the posture of engagement. I'm really thinking about micro contributions to resisting. Because when I think about the world, I just think, I can't do anything. I'm just going to stay here and grow dahlias and give them away, and it's too much. And then I think, hang on, we've got to do more than that. What does it mean to find and make and take up your role in the world? But we've got to do more than that. Every day there's a chance to do a something, even if it's to decide to hold my body in relation to another body that somehow resists a fascist response. Once again, I feel like I sound like I'm a bit mad, but can I be open-hearted in the world? Can I decide that I want to practice every day, this idea that we can be good to one another? That's taken me, the last few weeks I've been thinking about what it means to contribute to the resistance of fascism in the world in a way that feels sustainable and manageable, not narcissistic and completely impossible.
And I think it's something that we can all join in on the resistance with that. And it's interesting because there's elements of that I was sitting there and going, yep, I do a lot of those things too, and sometimes it's hard.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's hard when someone cuts you up in the traffic not
Yeah.
to drive up fast beside them and go, "You fucking idiot."
Yeah.
But it's those sort of things. I have to make a conscious choice a lot of the time where I'm thinking to myself, how do I respond to this in a way that's going to make the world better,
Yep.
in a way that's going to actually model love and acceptance and all of those things that I want to see more of. So I love that. I love that
Even
you're doing that.
model disagreement. I mean, I don't know. How do you do it? How do you say to your colleague, wow, I really disagree with that. Can you tell me how you got there? Like, I'm not very good at that. If I want to become good at it, I want to be able to say, I think you're 100% wrong and talk rather than be disingenuous or say, oh, that's interesting. And alongside that, I grow flowers and I give them away because that feels to me political. Shouldn't have to buy everything all the time.
I think you use that slightly passive aggressive approach where you go, that's really interesting. I'm curious how you got to that point.
Are you
And
curious?
people just love it.
Wouldn't it be bad for you? Wouldn't it be great to say, I think you're wrong. I object. Like, do you have to be curious or can't you just say, that's crap?
Now, with close friends, I say I'm calling bullshit on that. So absolutely, you can do
Yeah.
that. No, Kath, I'm curious because Troy hinted before that you guys have crossed paths, but we haven't really covered that off. You spoke about a wake that you were at a couple of weeks ago, but where did you guys meet and what was the point in time? Talk us through that, guys. I'm going to interview you both for a moment.
Troy, what do you remember?
Yeah, well, I was a Pentecostal refugee, and I had been at our, what we refer to as the inner city Church of Christ, is what I say, because it was part of the Churches of Christ, and it was, I don't know if you've listened to the episodes where we talked about this, Kath, but I sort of say it was um, instead of being a wolf in sheep's clothing, it was kind of like a conservative church in moderate clothing. But it's interesting because that was my experience. But some of the people I've spoken to since I've done the pod have said, actually, no, there was a lot of, moderation. There was a lot of small L liberal theology and things like that going around. So there definitely was different experiences of that. But I remember you came along to that church and it was still running an Exodus ministry at that time. So they were still trying to straighten out the kinks in people. And I don't know how you felt about that at the time. Was that a mission field for you? Did you come along like that? Why were you there?
I was there because of people. I made friends. So I was, we used to joke about two little community churches being a little bit connected. And actually, your mob always beat us at footy, I remember. I went along because of relationships, but I always had disagreements about the Exodus thing. It was one of those things I never quite got. And it was in that context, actually, that I remember feeling a bit like I wasn't taken seriously. My theological objections weren't taken seriously. That was some of the fuel for me wanting to go away and do some academic work, was actually embedded in some of the relationships I had in association with that church. So I never really got that. I never understood it. It wasn't about approving or disapproving. I just didn't get it. Why do you need to change people? I remember back then being confused and I disagreed. And I had strong relationships, lovely relationships with a number of people in that community. Some people who are still my close friends. So it was deeply relational. I was there because of relationships.
Yeah, I always remember wondering, even at the time, why you were there, because it was like, well, you've got your own church that you're involved in. Why are you so regular in attendance and stuff like that? And look, it's lovely to hear the fact that you just had really good relationships. But even at the time used to wonder, is this a bit of a mission field to you? Are you reaching out to these people because you can see that they're edging in the right direction, but maybe not fast enough? That was what I wondered.
No, it was actually good friendships. We got married there, actually, at that particular building. No, there was no sense of, if anything, there was an alignment in a kind of sort of inner city pastoral intention, that whole idea of community churches. There was a bit of alignment about that, but we had a very different trajectory because we were God Squad and really messy, and you guys were kind of neat and a bit more flamboyant. So we used to joke about that. And then you guys always beat us at footy, as I said before. So there was some sort of connection between the two communities, I think. It's interesting you talk about the mission field, because it seemed to me that certainly the leadership at that church were very certain. They had a really clear mission, and any sense of questioning that was met with kind of amazement. I remember never thinking I'd convince anyone to think the way I thought.
Which is ironic, actually, because coming from this, extreme Pentecostalism, they just seemed so liberal and open, and it was crazy. But look, another thing I want to talk about, just as we come to the end of our session here, I would really like to know, or in fact, I'd like to draw out from you, and I'm sure our audience would love to know, were you or were you not at one time the head of the Christian Television Association?
I was. And yes, I was. I lost my job there because we did a whole series of ads about Jesus being a refugee around the Tampa time. And Tim Costello and I got into trouble. It was great fun. So yeah, I got given that job. Yeah, that was kind of good fun. They gave us money. We ran a studio called Fish Communication Network, and our little studio made the ads. We had a lot of fun. Tim was involved. But yeah, that came to a bit of a sticky end. But it was a bit of fun.
It's funny because that church where that office was is actually the church where my parents got married, and it was actually moved stone by stone from somewhere else in Melbourne into that location. So I can remember going along and vibing with Fish Communications, etc. But you guys had
did a series of ads called Loved by God, and we went to all different communities. We went to mosques and synagogues and temples and churches, and we did these little vignettes of people just one guy mopping a Buddhist temple, and we had Loved by God. I love them so much. They've been archived by Acme. I love them so much, but they didn't go down so well by everybody.
No. They wouldn't have, because it would have been just so small and liberal. But I remember you had like bats, like the Christian television thing with bat wings, and it was just so, we're just going to rub up against everything. It's like vampire bats in the Christian television ads, and just Christians just would have hated them.
Some of them loved them. We thought it was funky at the time. I remember thinking, well, because we've got a bit of money to do it, and we had filmmakers and poets and artists that used to come and work with us, and they were lovely little little vignettes. I remember going off and filming them, and we got a lovely one of a Salvation Army officer wheeling a big table, and someone else sitting having a meal, scratching, just being normal. I loved them. Yeah, back in the day, but that didn't last for long, that job.
So how come? Just because of the refugee?
Yeah, I think I got the tail end of it. Like, it was coming to a bit of an end anyway, probably because of TV and money. And we probably didn't position ourselves in the growth trajectory of where the money was in the church. Like, we were really interested in engaging politically and with that kind of social justice edge. Tim Costello was working with us. There was a couple of people from the Uniting Church, really interested in kind of having a crack at public discourse. It was probably back in the day some sort of an attempt at some sort of public theological discourse. And I think we ran a certain direction, and then it came to an end. Oh, we did a big ad about the casino. That's right. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be. And we did a big ad about the casino and the rolling dice. And yeah, we joined that protest. So we had a bit of a crack. I reckon we could bring them back. Oh, we could do some good work now, couldn't we?
Do you reckon they'd be popular now, Kath?
No. Well, no. In all seriousness, I think, discourse in the public arena about philosophy and theology, we need it so much. This whole idea of thinking together. Yeah. Not so much Christian TV Association ads, but thinking together. I mean, there's a mob at the Wesley Centre doing some really fantastic public theology. Thinking together in your lunchtime.
Kath, I want to thank you for being a part of our show today. You got quite raw there when you were talking about some of the experiences you've had. So thank you for being brave and going there in a public context. But it's nice to see you smile. It's nice to see you laugh. And talking about these Christian television ads and stuff, they were funny.
Yeah, they were.
Because they rubbed people up. I loved them too, because by that stage I was well and truly on my way out the door, but I loved what you did. It was really good stuff. And one thing that I can say is you've always been authentic. You've always been who you are. And I was, just in reflecting, I didn't know a lot of your story, and this was the first time I've heard it, and it makes a lot of sense to me, hearing who you are.
Can I say something at the end? If anyone's listening, am I allowed to?
Of course.
A little, if anyone's listening and they're just wondering about thinking and study and engagement, there's, some people feel resistant about academia as if it's an ivory tower or something that's unattainable. It doesn't have to be. There's a beckoning in there, like come and think and engage and do some work. I'd like to encourage people to, if they've got it in them, to think about the pursuit of study as something that can really add to being free in the world. It's a push against this ivory tower business. There's join a community of thinkers, have a crack, read, disagree, engage. There's a freedom in that.
I do love your call to action for people to think, and I was a bit concerned there for a minute it was going to be an altar call, Kath. So thank you for saving us from an altar call, because,
liturgical
I could have put my hand up. That's right. No, thank you. It has been a wonderful conversation, and Kath, thank you for, as Troy said before, of delving deep into some of those areas that potentially you hadn't spoken about before, or thought to, maybe you had some revelations, dare I say, by the sound of it along the way. But I think it has been a great conversation that our listeners are going to connect with, and certainly resonate with many different parts of your story, because it is so familiar, but it is your story as well. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you. I trust you guys, but also I've listened to a lot of the people that you've had on here, and I guess my little contribution to the resistance is just being vulnerable and sharing it in with your community of folk that continue to think and engage with you guys. So thanks for listening to me babble on.
If you'd like to connect with the I Was a Teenage Fundamentalist podcast, then please see the links in our link tree in the show notes. We invite you to join our listener community on Facebook, and we're also on Instagram, X, and Reddit. Check out our merch on Redbubble. We've got t-shirts, hoodies, mugs, and all kinds of great evangelical stuff that you can wear proudly. All proceeds go to building and promoting the podcast. We want to give a huge shout out to our Patreon supporters. Subscribers get a range of benefits, including free merch, early access to episodes, access to our exclusive subscribers group, and monthly bonus content. Again, all proceeds of this go to the running and promotion costs of the podcast. A special thanks to Ava, who manages our social strategy, and also to Kerry and Bree, who manage our Facebook listener group, and also to Bree, who puts out our monthly newsletter on Substack. All of our episodes are transcribed by Leanne to increase accessibility. The show is produced and hosted by Brian McDowell and Troy Waller. The sound engineering for this episode was done by Jonathan O'Brien. I Was a Teenage Fundamentalist is available wherever you find your podcasts. Again, you can find all our links in our link tree in the show notes. Or why don't you pop across to our website at www.iwasateenagefundamentalist.com